They say silence can kill a family faster than any weapon. I know, because I watched mine die in silence. Every unspoken word, every swallowed apology, every truth buried beneath pride. My name is Margaret Eleanor Thompson. I'm 73 years old. I'm about to tell you how I destroyed my family with silence, and then brought them back to life, one word at a time. The story I'm about to share isn't pretty. It's messy, raw, and filled with choices I'm not proud of. But it's real. If there's one thing I've learned in my 7 decades on this earth, it's that real stories, the ones that show our scars and our mistakes, those are the ones that matter. Those are the ones that might save someone else from making the same terrible choices I did. So settle in. It's going to take a while. 'Cause rebuilding what took 30 years to destroy doesn't happen in a moment. It happens in small steps, painful conversations, and the kind of courage that only comes when you've lost everything and have nothing left to lose. I grew up in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, in a house where love was understood but never spoken. My father, Robert Harrison, was a factory foreman, a good man with calloused hands and a heart that carried too much weight. My mother, Dorothy, was a seamstress who could create beauty from scraps but never learned to create warmth from words. They loved each other, I'm certain of that, but I never once heard them say it. In our house, dinner was eaten in silence, broken only by the scrape of forks on plates. Achievements were acknowledged with a nod. Failures were met with disappointment that hung in the air like cigarette smoke. When my younger brother Tommy died at age 7 from pneumonia, we never spoke his name again. His room was cleaned out within a week, his photographs put away in a box in the attic, and the grief we all felt was swallowed down like bitter medicine. I learned early that feelings were private things, to be managed alone in the dark of your bedroom. I learned that real strength meant keeping your pain to yourself. I learned that words were dangerous things that could upset the delicate balance of a household. I learned wrong. But I didn't know that then. So when I met James Thompson at a church social in 1969, I thought I'd found someone who understood. James was quiet like me, serious, focused on building a future. He worked at the John Deere plant and talked about stability, about providing, about building something that would last. He didn't talk about love or feelings or dreams. He talked about square footage and interest rates and pension plans. I thought that was maturity. I thought that was real love, the kind that built houses instead of castles in the air. So when he proposed after 6 months of courtship with a simple, "I think we'd make a good match," I said yes. We were married in a small ceremony in March of 1970. I was 21 years old and thought I knew everything about what marriage should be. Our wedding night, James kissed me on the forehead and said, "We'll make a good life. Not I love you, not I'm the luckiest man alive, just a practical assessment of our future prospects." And I smiled and said, "Yes, we will," because that's what I'd been raised to believe love looked like. We had our first child, Rebecca, in 1971. She came into the world screaming, red-faced and furious, as if she already knew what kind of quiet house she was being born into. I held her in my arms that first night, this tiny, perfect creature, and I wanted to tell her 1,000 things. I wanted to tell her she was loved beyond measure. I wanted to promise her I'd protect her from everything. I wanted to sing and laugh and cry with joy. Instead, I said, "You're a good baby," in the same practical tone James used to compliment a well-cooked roast. And I set the pattern that would define our relationship for the next 40 years. David came 2 years later, quieter than his sister, more observant. Even as an infant, he seemed to be studying us, trying to figure out the rules of this silent household. And Emily arrived in 1976, our surprise baby, all sunshine and noise in a house that didn't know what to do with either. I loved my children. God, I loved them with every fiber of my being. But I didn't know how to show it except through action. I made their meals. I washed their clothes. I attended every school function and made sure their homework was done. I drove them to activities and band practice and sports. I kept them safe and clean and fed and educated. But I never told them I loved them. Not once. Because in my mind, love was something you showed, not said. Love was sacrifice and service, not words and affection. When Rebecca would run to me with arms outstretched, wanting to be held, I'd pat her head and redirect her to an activity. When David would try to tell me about his day, I'd listen while folding laundry, offering advice instead of empathy. When Emily would beg for bedtime stories, I'd read in a monotone, treating it like a chore to be completed. James and I ran our household like a corporation. We had rules and schedules and expectations. Dinner at 6, homework before television, chores on Saturday, church on Sunday. We were organized and efficient and utterly devoid of warmth. The children learned quickly. By the time Rebecca was 10, she'd stopped trying to hug me. By the time David was 8, he'd stopped sharing his feelings. Emily held out longer. She was always the rebel, but even she eventually learned that emotions were met with discomfort and practical solutions rather than comfort. We were a family that functioned but didn't connect. We lived in the same house but inhabited separate worlds, and I thought that was normal. I thought that was enough. Rebecca left for college in 1989, choosing a school in California as far from Iowa as she could get. She called every Sunday at first, duty calls that lasted exactly 10 minutes and covered only the basics: classes, grades, weather. I told her to study hard and eat properly. She said she would. Neither of us said anything real. By her sophomore year, the calls came every other week. By junior year, once a month. By senior year, only on major holidays. When she graduated, she called to tell us she'd gotten a job in San Francisco and would be moving home. James said, "That's good. San Francisco has opportunities." I said, "Make sure you find a safe apartment." She said, "Okay," and hung up. None of us acknowledged that our daughter was building a life 3,000 miles away from us. David went to Iowa State, close enough to visit, but he rarely did. He was studying engineering, following in James's practical footsteps. He was serious and focused and increasingly distant. When he did come home for holidays, he'd spend most of his time in his old room, buried in textbooks. I'd knock to tell him dinner was ready. He'd say, "Thank you." We'd eat in near silence. He'd leave the next morning with a brief nod. Emily, our firecracker, tried to break through. She was the one who kept pushing against our walls, demanding more, expecting more. In high school, she'd explode in fury at the dinner table. "Why don't you people ever talk? Why doesn't anyone in this family say what they're actually feeling?" James would tell her to lower her voice. I'd tell her that's not how we behave. She'd storm off to her room and we'd finish dinner in the blessed quiet. I remember one night when Emily was 16. She came home from a date in tears, her heart broken by some boy who'd promised forever and delivered a week. She stood in the kitchen doorway, mascara running down her face, looking at me with such desperate need. She wanted comfort. She wanted her mother. She wanted to be held and told that heartbreak would unkill her and that she was worthy of real love. I looked at her crying face and felt utterly frozen. Part of me wanted to run to her, to hold her, to let her cry on my shoulder, but I didn't know how. It wasn't what my mother had done for me. It wasn't what I'd taught myself to do. So instead, I said, "Wash your face and get some sleep. It'll seem better in the morning." The look she gave me in that moment, I'll never forget it. It was disappointment and resignation and a kind of death. Something in her eyes closed off, and I watched my youngest daughter decide that her mother would never be what she needed. She wiped her face with her sleeve, said "You're right" in a flat voice, and walked away. I heard her bedroom door close with a quiet click that sounded like goodbye. I stood in that kitchen and felt something twist in my chest, but I pushed it down, told myself I'd handled it properly, told myself that coddling children didn't help them grow strong. I was so good at lying to myself back then. Emily left for college in 1994, choosing a school in Colorado. Like Rebecca, she chose distance. Unlike Rebecca, she didn't pretend to stay connected. The duty calls stopped after the first semester. She came home for Christmas that year, stayed 3 days, and left without saying goodbye. I found a note on the kitchen counter, went back early. "See you next time." There was no next time. Not for years. James and I became empty nesters, rattling around in a 4-bedroom house that echoed with all the words we'd never said. Our marriage, which had never been warm, became glacial. We'd go entire days speaking only when necessary. Pass the salt. Did you pay the electric bill? I'll be late on Thursday. I told myself we were comfortable with each other, that this was what mature love looked like. But the truth was, we were strangers who happened to share an address. We slept in the same bed but lived in different worlds. We were performing the roles of husband and wife without any of the intimacy that made those roles meaningful. In 1998, David got married. We found out when we received an invitation in the mail 6 weeks before the wedding. It was in Chicago, where his fiancée Sarah's family lived. The invitation was formal and impersonal. The kind you send to distant relatives you re-obligated to invite, but do unexpect to attend. We went, of course. We sat in the third row and watched our son marry a woman we'd met exactly once. At an awkward dinner where David had introduced her with, "This is Sarah," and nothing else. We watched him say, "I love you" to her with such tenderness and emotion. And I realized I'd never heard my son speak those words in his entire life. Not to us, certainly. Maybe not to anyone until he met this woman who'd taught him it was safe. At the reception, Sarah's mother gave a toast that made everyone cry. She talked about watching her daughter grow, about being proud of the woman she'd become, about welcoming David into their family with open hearts. She said, "Love isn't just something you feel, something you say every day, so the people you love never have to wonder." The room erupted in applause. Then it was James's turn. He stood, cleared his throat, and said, "David is a good son." "Sarah seems nice. We wish you well." He sat down. People clapped politely, confused. David's jaw was tight, his eyes bright with tears he wouldn't shed. Sarah squeezed his hand. I sat frozen, finally seeing what we'd done to our children. We left the reception early. David didn't try to stop us. On the 6-hour drive home, James and I didn't speak at all. When we got home, I went to bed and stared at the ceiling until dawn. Feeling something crack inside my chest that I couldn't name, Rebecca called in 2001 to tell us she was engaged. She was 30 years old, and we'd seen her maybe 5 times in the past decade. Her fiancé was a man named Marcus, a software engineer. She didn't invite us to meet him before the wedding. "The wedding was small," she said, "just close friends and family." We weren't invited. I remember hanging up the phone and standing in the kitchen, trying to process what had just happened. My daughter was getting married, and we weren't invited. Not because of a mistake or an oversight, but because we weren't close friends or family. We were just the people who'd raised her. I wanted to call her back. I wanted to demand an explanation, to insist we be included, to fight for our place in her life. But I didn't know how. I didn't have the words. I didn't have the right. So I did nothing. And Rebecca got married in a ceremony in San Francisco that I saw only in the handful of photos she posted to her new Facebook account. David and Sarah had their first child in 2002, a boy they named Christopher. We found out 3 weeks after he was born when David sent an email with a photo attached. Christopher James Thompson, born January 15, 2002. 7 pounds 3 ounces. Mother and baby healthy. That was it. No invitation to visit. No questions about coming to meet their grandson. Just a factual announcement of his existence. I printed the photo and put it on the refrigerator. I looked at it every day, this tiny human who carried our blood and our name but would grow up not knowing us. I wanted to drive to Chicago immediately, to knock on their door and demand to be part of his life. But I didn't, because that's not what we did. We waited to be invited. We respected boundaries. We didn't impose. Emily called that same year, her voice strange and slurred. It took me several minutes to realize she was drunk. "I just wanted to call my mom," she said, her words running together. "Is that weird? I wanted to call my mom and tell her I'm sad. So sad, Mom. I'm so fucking sad all the time, and I don't know why. And I thought maybe if I called you, you'd know what to say to make it better. But you don't, do you? You never did. Emily, have you been drinking?" It was the only thing I could think to say. She laughed, a bitter sound that cut through the phone line. "It's perfect. That's fucking perfect." If your daughter calls you crying for help and that's what you say? God, what did I expect? She hung up. I tried calling back 3 times. She didn't answer. I should have gotten in the car, should have driven to Colorado, broken down her door if necessary, and held my daughter until she stopped hurting. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table and cried for the first time in years. James found me there an hour later, tears streaming down my face, shoulders shaking with sobs I'd held back for decades. "What's wrong?" he asked, standing in the doorway like I was a stranger. "Everything," I said. "Everything is wrong. Our children hate us, James. They don't call. They don't visit. Rebecca didn't invite us to her wedding. David waited 3 weeks to tell us about our grandson. Emily is drinking and crying, and we do uneven know why because we never bothered to be the kind of parents she could talk to." James was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "They're adults. They have their own lives. They have their own lives because we push them away." I was shouting now, something I never did. We raised them in a house without love, without warmth, without any of the things children need. We gave them food and shelter and education, but we never gave them us. We never told them we loved them. We never held them. My voice broke. "God, James, when was the last time you hugged one of our children?" He didn't answer. He couldn't, because neither of us could remember. "This is on us," I said quietly. "Every bit of this. We did this. And I don't know how to fix it." James stood there for another moment, his face unreadable. Then he said, "It's too late to fix it," and walked away. I heard his study door close. I sat alone in the kitchen as the sun set, surrounded by the silence we'd built our marriage on. That was the night I decided James was right. It was too late. I was 69 years old. My children were grown and gone. The life I'd built was the life I deserved. I would finish out my years in this quiet house with this quiet man. And when I died, my children would come to my funeral out of obligation and feel nothing but relief that duty was finally done. I made peace with that. Or I thought I did. James had a heart attack in 2003. Massive, fatal. The doctor said he was probably dead before he hit the floor. He was at work, standing at his desk, and just collapsed. They called me from the hospital where the ambulance had taken him, but by the time I arrived, he was gone. I stood in that hospital room looking at my husband of 33 years and felt ... nothing. No grief, no sadness. Just a vast emptiness where feelings should be. We'd spent 3 decades living parallel lives that never quite touched. I'd slept beside him for thousands of nights without really knowing him. And now he was gone, and I realized I had no idea what I'd lost because I'd never really had it. The funeral was small. James had worked at the same company for 40 years but had no real friends. He had colleagues who came out of respect. He had bowling league acquaintances who came out of obligation. But no one who really knew him. No one who could stand up and tell stories about who he really was beneath a quiet, practical exterior. All 3 children came. Rebecca flew in from San Francisco, looking polished and professional and completely untouchable in a designer black suit. David drove up from Chicago with Sarah and 4-year-old Christopher, who I was meeting for the first time. Emily came from Colorado, thinner than she should be, with dark circles under her eyes that made her look haunted. They sat in the front row during the service, but not with me. They sat together, the 3 of them in a unit, and I sat alone at the end. Like we were acquaintances, like they were there for their father, and my presence was just a technicality. At the reception after the burial, I watched them interact with each other. I heard Rebecca tell David about her job, saw him show her photos of Christopher. I listened to Emily make them laugh with some story about a disastrous camping trip. I watched my children being a family with each other, and I understood that I wasn't part of it. I was the outsider looking in at something I'd never been invited to join. People kept approaching me with condolences. "I'm so sorry for your loss. He was a good man. You must be devastated." I accepted their words with nods and thank yous, playing the role of grieving widow because that's what was expected. But the truth was, I'd lost James years ago. Maybe I'd never really had him at all. As the reception was winding down, Rebecca approached me. Mom, we need to talk about the house and Dad's affairs. I have to fly back tomorrow afternoon, so maybe we could meet in the morning. Not, how are you holding up? Not, are you okay? It's just business. Just practical matters to be handled efficiently. She was her father's daughter, and she was mine. We'd trained her well. Of course, I said. 9 o'clock. Perfect. I'll bring coffee. She walked away, already pulling out her phone to handle the next item on her list. David came over next, Christopher clinging to his leg. Mom, we're going to head back to the hotel. Christopher is tired. He hesitated, then added, Are you going to be okay tonight? Sarah could stay with you if you need someone. The offer was kind but perfunctory. He was asking because it was the right thing to do, not because he actually wanted to spend time with me. I could see the relief in his eyes when I said, No, I'll be fine. Thank you, David. Emily was the last to approach. She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something in her eyes, maybe pity, maybe regret. I'm sorry, Mom, she said quietly. I know you didn't have the marriage you deserved. It was the most honest thing any of my children had said to me in years. I felt tears prick my eyes, but I blinked them back. Thank you, Emily. She nodded, turned to leave, then stopped. Without looking back, she said, He wasn't the only one, you know? You didn't deserve the life you got either, but you chose it. You chose it every single day. Then she walked away, leaving me standing alone in the fellowship hall of the church where I'd been married. That night, I sat in my empty house, my house now, not ours, and let myself really look at my life. I was 69 years old. I had 3 children who barely spoke to me. I had a grandson I'd met once. I had a daughter-in-law I didn't know. I had another daughter who was struggling with something I wasn't allowed to help with. I had no close friends because I'd never learned how to let anyone close. I had no hobbies because my hobby had been maintaining a perfect house for a family that could unwait to leave it. I had spent my entire life building walls instead of bridges. And now I stood alone behind those walls, completely isolated from everything that mattered. And Emily was right, chosen it. Every single day, I'd chosen silence over connection, control over vulnerability, safety over love. I could choose differently. The thought came to me quietly, tentatively, like the first bird singing before dawn. I could choose differently. It wasn't too late. Not if I was willing to do the work. Not if I was willing to be brave in a way I'd never been brave before. Not if I was willing to say the words I'd spent a lifetime avoiding. I could rebuild my family. One word at a time. The next morning, Rebecca arrived at exactly 9 o'clock with 2 cups of expensive coffee and a leather portfolio full of documents. She sat at my kitchen table, opened her laptop, and started running through the list of things that needed to be handled. Insurance policies, bank accounts, the house, Dad's pension, the will. I let her talk for about 5 minutes. Then I said, Rebecca, stop. She looked up surprised. What? Just ... stop, please. I took a breath. My hands were shaking. Before we talk about any of that, I need to say something. She frowned, clearly uncomfortable. Mom, we really need to get through this. I have a flight at I love you. The words came out hoarse, rusty from lack of use. I love you so much, and I have never told you that, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Rebecca stared at me like I'd started speaking a foreign language. What? I love you. I loved you the moment I first held you. I loved you when you took your first steps. I loved you when you went to prom. I loved you when you graduated. I loved you when you called to tell me you were engaged, even though it broke my heart that you didn't want me at your wedding. I have loved you every single day of your life, and I never told you, and that is the biggest failure of my life. Her face was frozen, unreadable. Why are you saying this now? 'Cause your father is dead. And I realized at his funeral that I do unwant people standing around my casket someday, wondering who I really was because no one ever really knew me. I don't want you and your siblings sitting together, relieved that you've done your duty. I don't want to die the way I've lived, surrounded by people who share my blood but don't know my heart. Tears were running down my face now. I didn't wipe them away. I failed you, Rebecca. I failed all three of you. I thought love was something you showed through action, not words. I thought keeping you safe and fed and educated was enough. But it wasn't. You needed words. You needed affection. You needed a mother who could tell you she was proud of you and hold you when you cried and celebrate with you when you succeeded. And I wasn't that mother, but I want to be now. If you'll let me. Rebecca was crying too, silent tears that she tried to wipe away discreetly. Mom, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to hear it. I love you. I'm proud of you. You've built an incredible life for yourself despite having parents who did UN give you the emotional foundation you deserved. You are strong and successful and capable, and that's despite me, not because of me. But I want to change that. Want to be part of your life if you'll have me. Even if it's just phone calls. Even if it's just emails. I'll take whatever you're willing to give, and I won't ask for more. But I needed you to know. I love you. We sat in silence for a long moment. Then Rebecca closed her laptop. I changed my flight, she said quietly. I'm staying until Wednesday. Let's go through Dad's stuff later. Right now, I think I need you to tell me about, I don't know, tell me something real. Tell me something you've never told me before. So I did. I told her about my brother Tommy, who died when I was 9. I told her about how we never spoke his name again. How I was raised to believe that grief was something to be hidden. I told her about my mother, who I never once heard say, I love you, and how I thought that was normal. I told her about meeting her father and mistaking emotional unavailability for maturity. I told her about holding her as a baby and being terrified that I'd break her, that I'd do something wrong, that I'd fail her. I did fail you, I said. But it wasn't because I didn't love you. It was because I didn't know how to show love in any way except the way I'd been shown, which was barely at all. Rebecca listened, really listened. And when I was done, she said, I'm angry at you. I've been angry at you my whole life. Do you know what it's like to grow up wondering if your mother even likes you? The words hit like a physical blow. I'm sorry. I know you are. But sorry doesn't erase 30 years of feeling like I wasn't good enough for your attention, for your affection, for your love. You were always good enough. You were perfect. I was the one who wasn't good enough. I was the one who failed. She nodded slowly. Yeah, you did. She wiped her eyes, but you're trying now. That's something. I don't know if it's enough. I don't know if we can fix this, but it's something. I'll take something, I said. Something is more than I deserve. We talked for 3 more hours. Really talked. About her life in San Francisco. About her husband, Marcus, who I'd never met. About her job in marketing that she loved, but that stressed her out. About how she'd always felt like she was performing for approval that never came. About therapy she'd been in for 5 years to deal with childhood emotional neglect. About how angry she was, but also how tired she was of being angry. Before she left, she hugged me. It was brief and awkward to people who didn't know how to hold each other. But it was real. And when she pulled away, she said, I'll call you. Really call you. Not just duty calls. We'll try this. Not making promises, but we'll try. That's all I ask, I said. I drove to Chicago the next week without calling first. I was terrified David would tell me not to come, so I didn't give him the option. I showed up at his house at 10 in the morning on a Saturday, knocked on the door, and waited with my heart pounding. Sarah answered. She looked surprised but not hostile. Margaret, we weren't expecting you. I know. Sorry to just show up. Is David home? She hesitated, then opened the door wider. He's in the garage with Christopher. I'll get him. I stood in their living room, taking in the photos on the walls, David and Sarah's wedding. Christopher as a baby, family vacation pictures. None of them included me or James. We were absent from their visual history, as if we'd never existed. David came in looking wary. Mom, is everything okay? Did something happen? No? Yes. I don't know. I took a breath. I need to talk to you. Really talk. And I need you to listen, even though everything in you is probably screaming to keep me at arm's length the way I taught you to do. He crossed his arms. Okay? So I told him everything I'd told Rebecca. about my childhood, about learning that love was silent, about failing him, about watching him say, "I love you too, Sarah," at their wedding, and realizing I never heard him say those words because I'd never taught him it was safe to say them. About getting the email announcing Christopher S. birth and feeling like a stranger being notified of a distant relative S. baby. I love you, David. I loved you when you were born, this serious little boy who seemed to be studying the world from day one. I loved you when you brought home straight A's because I knew how hard you worked for them. I loved you when you chose engineering because I could see the spark in your eyes when you talked about how things worked. I loved you when you married Sarah because I could see she made you happy in a way I'd never been happy. I love you. And I'm sorry I never said it. David's jaw was tight. Why now? Why, after Dad's funeral, do you suddenly decide you want to be emotional? It's because I saw my whole life laid out at that funeral. I saw what happens when you live without love, without connection, without ever taking the risk of being vulnerable. Your father and I had 33 years together, and I don't think we really knew each other at all. And then he was gone, and I realized I was going to die the same way and known. Alone, with children who came to my funeral out of obligation and felt nothing but relief when it was over. So this is about you, David said. About what you want. About easing your guilt. Yes, I said simply. It is. I'm being completely selfish. I want a relationship with my children. I want to know my grandson, want to be part of your life, and I have no right to ask for that because I haven't earned it. But I am asking anyway because the alternative is spending the rest of my life alone in that house, dying slowly from loneliness and regret. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I don't know if I can do this. I spent my whole childhood trying to get your attention, your approval, your love. And nothing was ever enough. I graduated top of my class, and you said, that's good. I got into Iowa State, and you said, that's practical. I tried to tell you about my dreams, and you told me to be realistic. Do you have any idea what that does to a kid? No, I said honestly, I don't. Because no one ever asked me about my dreams either. So I didn't know kids were supposed to have them. But that's not an excuse. That's just an explanation. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm just asking for a chance to do better. Sarah had been standing in the doorway, listening. Now she stepped forward. David, maybe you should let her meet Christopher properly. He looked at his wife, something passing between them in that silent communication that comes from real intimacy. Finally, he nodded. Okay? But I'm not making any promises. I don't deserve promises, I said. Christopher was 4 years old, bright and curious. He looked like David had looked at that age, SHS, observant, a little cautious. David brought him in from the garage, his small hand in his father's large one. Christopher, this is your grandmother, David said quietly. Christopher looked up at me. I have another grandma. The question cut deep because it revealed the truth. Sarah's mother was Grandma. I was just a woman who happened to be related to him. Yes, I said, kneeling down to his level. I'm your daddy's mom, and I'm very, very happy to meet you properly. Why haven't you come before? He asked with the blunt honesty of a child. I looked up at David, saw him waiting for my answer. Because I made mistakes, I said to Christopher. I hurt your daddy's feelings when he was growing up, and so he didn't want me around, and that's my fault. But I'm trying to fix it. Is that okay? Christopher considered this seriously. Daddy says when you make a mistake, you have to say sorry and try to fix it. Your daddy is very smart, I said, and he's right. So I'm saying sorry and I'm trying to fix it. Christopher nodded. Okay? Do you want to see my Lego spaceship? I would love to, I said, my voice catching. I spent the rest of the day at their house. I played with Christopher. I helped Sarah make lunch. I talked to David, really talked about his work, his life, his hopes for his son. It was awkward and painful and beautiful. And when I left, David hugged me. It was brief and stiff, but it was real. I'll call you next week, he said. Maybe we can set up a regular time for you to visit. If you want. I want, I said. I want very much. Emily was the hardest. She was the one who been hurt most deeply because she was the one who tried the longest. She was the one who'd kept pushing for connection until she finally gave up. And from what I'd heard in that drunken phone call, she was the one who was suffering the most. I flew to Colorado. Rebecca helped me book the flight and gave me Emily's address. Apparently they stayed in closer contact than I'd known. I rented a car at the airport and drove to the small apartment complex where my youngest daughter lived. When she opened the door, I barely recognized her. She was thin to thin with dark circles under her eyes and a weariness that seemed to emanate from her bones. She looked at me with surprise that quickly turned to wariness. "Mom, what are you doing here? Can I come in?" She hesitated, then stepped aside. Her apartment was small and messy, with dishes in the sink and laundry piled on the couch. The blinds were drawn, making it dark, even though it was mid-afternoon. It looked like the home of someone who'd stopped caring. "Emily, what's wrong?" I asked, unable to hide my concern. She laughed bitterly. "Now you ask? Now, 30 years into my life, you show up and ask what's wrong." "Yes," I said. "I know I'm 30 years too late, but I'm asking now. What's wrong, baby?" The word baby, something I'd never called her, never called any of them, broke something in her. She sank onto the couch and her shoulders started shaking. I didn't think. I just moved. I sat beside her and pulled her into my arms, and for the first time in her adult life, I held my daughter while she cried. She fought it for a moment, her body stiff with resistance. But then she collapsed into me, sobbing like the child she'd once been. "I'm so tired," she cried. "I'm so tired of pretending I'm okay. I'm tired of trying to be strong. I'm tired of feeling like there's something wrong with me because I need more than everyone else. I'm tired of being alone." "You're not alone," I said, stroking her hair. "I'm here. I know I haven't been before, and I know that's my fault. But I'm here now." "Why?" she asked, pulling back to look at me. "Why now? What changed?" I did. "Your father's death made me realize I didn't want to die the way he did, surrounded by people who didn't really know him, because he never let them. I didn't want to waste the rest of my life being alone when I have 3 incredible children who I love but never told." "Do you have any idea what it was like?" Emily asked. "Growing up in that house, it was like living in a museum. Everything perfect and cold and untouchable. Rebecca and David learned to be like you, quiet and controlled and emotionally unavailable. But I couldn't. I tried so hard, Mom. I tried to be what you wanted, but I couldn't stop feeling things. I couldn't stop needing more." "You shouldn't have had to," I said. "Needing love and affection and connection isn't a weakness. It's what makes us human. I was the one who was broken, not you. I've been in therapy for 2 years," she said quietly, "trying to figure out why I can't maintain relationships. It's why I sabotage everything good that comes into my life. It's why I feel so fundamentally unlovable. My heart was breaking. Emily, you are lovable. You are so lovable. You're warm and funny and passionate and everything I was too scared to be. I loved you so much it terrified me because you know what to do with it. So you did nothing," she said flatly. "So I did nothing. I agreed. And that was worse than doing it wrong. At least if I'd tried and failed, you would have known I cared. But I didn't even try." We sat in silence for a while. Then Emily said, "I've been drinking too much. And sometimes I take pills. Not anything serious, just enough to make everything fuzzy. Enough so I don't feel so much." "I want to help," I said. "Tell me how to help. I don't know if you can. I don't know if anyone can. Then we'll figure it out together. We'll find you better help. We'll get you into a better therapy program, maybe a treatment center if you need it. We'll do whatever it takes. Why do you care now?" There was no accusation in the question, just genuine confusion. "Because I wasted so many years not caring, and I don't want to waste another second. Because you're my daughter, and you're hurting, and I should have been here all along. Because I love you, and I should have told you that every single day of your life." Emily started crying again, and I held her. We sat like that for a long time, my youngest daughter finally getting the comfort she'd needed for 3 decades. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said eventually. I know, but I want to try. I want ... I want a mom. I've always wanted a mom. Then that's what I'll be. Whatever you need, however you need it. I'll be your mom. I stayed in Colorado for a week. I helped Emily clean her apartment. I took her to doctor appointments. We found a therapist who specialized in addiction and childhood trauma. We looked into outpatient treatment programs, and we talked. We talked about everything I'd done wrong, about how it had affected her, about what she needed from me now. It was the hardest week of my life. Hearing how deeply I'd wounded my child, how my choices had rippled through her entire life, causing pain and damage I'd never intended but couldn't deny. But I listened to every word, and I didn't make excuses, and I didn't ask her to spare my feelings. I owed her the truth of her pain. Before I left, she hugged me, really hugged me, not the brief, awkward embrace from David. Thank you for coming, she said. Thank you for trying. Thank you for letting me, I said. The next 2 years were the hardest and most rewarding of my life. I had to learn how to be a mother at 70 years old. I had to learn how to communicate, how to be vulnerable, how to show love in ways beyond just practical support. I called Rebecca every week. At first, the conversations were stilted and awkward. We didn't know how to talk to each other beyond surface pleasantries. But slowly, week by week, we learned. She told me about her work stress. I told her about my own career as a secretary before ID had kids, something I'd never shared before. She told me about her marriage. I told her the truth about mine. We started building something real. I visited David and Sarah once a month. I played with Christopher, learning to be the grandmother I'd never been. I baked cookies with him. I read him stories with voices and enthusiasm instead of monotone efficiency. I told him I loved him every single time I saw him. And slowly, David softened. He started calling me between visits. He started sharing more about his life. The wounds didn't heal overnight, but they started to close. Emily moved back to Iowa. She enrolled in an intensive outpatient program for addiction and continued therapy. She moved into a small apartment 30 minutes from my house. We had dinner together twice a week. I went to her AA meetings as her support person. I held her hand through the hard days and celebrated with her through the victories. And slowly, painfully, she started to heal. I started therapy myself. 70 years old, I sat in a therapist's office and talked about my childhood, about the lessons I'd learned about love and emotion, about the ways I'd replicated my parents' mistakes. It was humbling and painful, but necessary. I couldn't rebuild my family without rebuilding myself first. I learned to say I love you without it feeling foreign. I practiced in the mirror, which sounds ridiculous, but I needed to hear the words come out of my mouth. I needed them to feel normal instead of terrifying. And then I said them to my children. Every phone call, every visit, every email. I love you. I love you. I love you. Words I'd denied them their whole lives. I gave them now without reservation. I learned to hug. Again, it sounds absurd, but I had to practice physical affection. I had to override a lifetime of training that touch was uncomfortable and unnecessary. My therapist had me start small, holding hands with Emily during difficult conversations, putting my hand on David's shoulder when we talked, greeting Rebecca with a hug instead of a stiff nod. Each touch was a small act of bravery, a small rebellion against the cold person I'd been. I learned to apologize specifically. Not just, I'm sorry for everything, but I'm sorry for not coming to your room when you cried. I'm sorry for not celebrating your successes with. I'm sorry for making you feel like your emotions were a burden. Each apology was specific, acknowledging the real harm I'd done, and I learned to listen, really listen. Not to fix problems or offer solutions, but just to hear my children when they spoke, to let them express their feelings without judgment, to validate their pain instead of minimizing it, to say that must have been hard instead of you're strong, you'll get over it. It was exhausting. There were days I wanted to give up, to retreat back into the safe silence I'd known my whole life. There were moments when the discomfort of vulnerability felt unbearable, but I kept going. Because the alternative, dying alone, unknown, with children who felt nothing but relief at my passing, was worse. In 2005, 3 years after James died, I did something that would have been unthinkable in my old life. I threw a family reunion. I invited all three of my children, their partners, and Christopher. I spent weeks planning, calling each of them multiple times to coordinate schedules, making sure everyone could come. Rebecca brought Marcus, and I finally got to meet my son-in-law. He was quiet and kind, and I could see why Rebecca loved him. I made an effort to talk to him, to ask about his work, to get to know him as a person instead of just Rebecca's husband. It was awkward at first. I wasn't good at small talk, but he was patient with me. David came with Sarah and Christopher, who was now 7 and full of energy. Sarah was pregnant with their second child, and I cried when they told me, actual tears of joy that I didn't try to hide. "I'm so happy for you," I said, hugging them both. "Thank you for letting me be part of this." Emily came alone but sober. She was 3 months into her recovery, doing better but still fragile. She pulled me aside when she arrived. "I'm nervous," she admitted. "Being with everyone. It's a lot, I know," I said, taking her hand. "But we're all here together, and that's what matters. And if it gets too much, you can always go to the guest room and take a break. No one will judge you. You've changed so much," she said quietly. "I'm trying to become the mother you needed," I said. "Better late than never, right?" She smiled, tears in her eyes. "Yeah, better late than never." That weekend was far from perfect. There were awkward moments and painful silences. There were conversations that touched on old wounds. Rebecca and David got into an argument about something from childhood, and I had to mediate a skill I was still learning. Emily had a moment of anxiety and had to excuse herself, and I went with her, sitting with her in the guest room until she felt ready to rejoin everyone. But there were also beautiful moments. Christopher teaching me a clapping game he'd learned at school. Marcus sharing photos from his and Rebecca's recent trip to Italy. All of us cooking dinner together, laughing when I burned the garlic bread. Emily playing guitar, something I didn't know she could do, and singing while we all listened in amazement. On the last night, after dinner, we sat in the living room, all of us together. Christopher had fallen asleep on the couch, his head in Sarah's lap. The adults nursed glasses of wine, sparkling water for Emily. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was part of a real family.